G'day YouTube, warbles on a lot here. Once again, it's pretty cold outside and there's some wind out there, so I'll do a bit of this video inside before we go out. When I first hatched the idea of getting a little garden shed, I paid for the shed and it's sitting in its flat pack still in the shop, and I realised I didn't know enough about it to know how big the slab should actually be for the particular shed in question. So this is 3 metres wide and 2.96 metres deep. So I went to the shop where I purchased the shed and the people who were kind enough to store it there while I'm waiting to get my slab on the ground. And I got them to print me out a bit of paper just exactly like that one, but I lost it. So then, a month or 3 ago, I decided I really had to get off my arse and do something. So I went back and that's the replacement. So I had that bit of paper here ready to hand over when the concretor showed up. And he looked at the bit of paper and he made some calculations and he went over there and he made me a slab. And you knew it had to be 3020 millimetres and it had to be 3100 millimetres. Right? 3 metres and 2 centimetres, 3 metres and 10 centimetres. And I said that I wanted a little bit of a porch, a metre deep, to stand out there in front of the doors, and he was able to join 2 bits of wood to become a single bit each so he could lengthen his formwork, so we were able to get an extra metre. So I haven't got 4 metres, or 4.1 metres, I've got 4 metres. So I'm still going to get my porch, and my slab is big enough for my shed. Those of you familiar with my channel for many years may remember that in this bag I keep my serious tape measure. And I lent this tape measure to the fellas who were putting the post in the ground for mine. So yeah, 4.1, and I would have been nice if I got 4.2, but 10 centimetres too small, doesn't really matter when 3.1 was the size specified for the shed. Here we're shooting for 3.02. So let's see what we actually got. There's your 3.02, we got 3 metres and 10 centimetres, so that's good as well. Now, that's what happens when the person who's paying for the job knows that you've got to actually have a bit of paper with the correct measurements on it to give to the person who's doing the job, because just waving your arms at them and saying, oh, it's a normal 3 metre by 3 metre shed, that can have problems. But anyway, when the contractor and his offsider showed up, one of the very first earliest indications I had that he was fairly early on in his career as a solo operator, despite the fact that it was clear that he'd had a lot of experience in putting concrete onto the ground and making it shape up and stick in the right proportions and directions and locations. But the first idea I got that running his own work site might be a bit of a new experience, and that's what the tank pad and the house pad have come to look like in the bright light of the grey, cloudy, miserable, raining day. If I keep the camera below the level of the horizon, it doesn't get too badly light struck, and you can sort of see what's been achieved, which I reckon is a hell of a lot. But anyway, the very first indication I got that this might be a bit of a new experience, you see that line there where the paint has been ground off, abraded off? That was done by Elizabeth's Slab. That was the first time that float had been used. and all this stuff in blue appeared to me to be pretty new. These little bits and bobs, the hand tools, they didn't quite look as brand spanky new as they do, but here was the true giveaway. Bubble wrap on the wheels, on the legs of the wheelbarrow. So I reckon he's done pretty bloody well, considering that I suspect this might be very early on in his solo career. However, it's not a perfect result at this point in time. We're bloody happy about all of this. This dirt here, which used to be a bit of a mound, formed when I dug out the bottom of a dam that had silted up. I dug it out by hand a long time ago. It's been spread out. It was considered for a while as a possibility for being used for fill, but it turned out to be unnecessary, because after pig rooting around for a while with his excavator, looking for something he could use as fill, that's when old mate discovered this, an actual clay quarry and gravel pit-ish sort of kind of thing. So my theory is I'm going to have to come down here with a pick and shovel and see how bloody deep I can get it to go, but he reckons that there is the actual rock bar, and if so, that might become a table. If I can dig further down here and keep the roof fairly low, like I don't mind having to crouch down here if it adds an extra half a metre to the metre I want to put on top of the ground as insulation. And the theory is, over the top, put some really good dirt and water it with potatoes growing in it. And the water content of potato leaves and stalks and stems is such that in the 1939 bushfires in Victoria, the people who got out of it alive were the ones who run out into the middle of a potato patch and lay down in the hollows between the humped up dirt with the potatoes growing on the top of the humps. And they had all that thermal mass of the potato plants over their head. Whereas the people who climbed into elevated water tanks with the metal side subject to all the radiant heat, well, first they turned into primate soup, and then the pot boiled dry and they got burnt, even as pre-cooked soup. So, as a segue, I always thought that if you jumped in a water tank when you were going to get burnt over, then you were automatically dead. Until I'd met a bloke whose house got burnt over, and he'd stayed to defend right until the end, and then he jumped in his water tank for 3 or 5 minutes, and then jumped back out and put out all of the remaining little fires, so he's still got a house, wooden house, in a place where 60 people had their houses burned down in one afternoon. But it was an unusual circumstance. His house was in the bottom of a valley, and the fire sort of come over one ridge, roared down, roared up, and yeah, he wasn't in there for long enough for his water tank to get cooked, and the water tank did not have active fire around its sides, and he was in the water at, yeah, top half of the tank got pretty hot, but there's a lot of thermal mass in half a tank full of water. Anyway, that's the fire bunker and all of the good stuff. Yesterday, my second or third cousin's daughter and her husband came out, having had some experience at building these little sheds, to earn a little bit of pocket money by putting the panels together and sticking them up, and then I'd supplied the electricity with which to bolt the shed to the concrete. And while I was grinding off the buried starriness of the pickets, the relations put together the panels, and then they come over and they explained to me that the problem was 3 metres, not 3.1 metres, which is kind of what it needed to be, but the absolute minimum was 3.02 metres. So we are literally 20 millimetres too short, not wide enough. So that's 20 millimetres too short. And if that was supposed to be 3.2, then this was supposed to be a minimum of 3.2 metres and 3.1 metres and 3.02, yeah. So, yeah, this one's 10 centimetres too short. And that, as you can imagine, that brought all play to a stop yesterday, at a time when the theory was, let's get the shed up before it rains and then it can be set up when the darling daughter comes back from the current expedition to go away for 2 weeks and earn money as a traffic controller, 5 hours away. So yeah, I'm expecting old mate the concrete ore to come along and more or less agree with me that what must have happened is that instead of measuring the inside here of the slab they were about to pour, maybe they measured the outside of the formwork. You know, like where there was once upon a time star pickets, right? Maybe they've measured from here. That still wouldn't give 10 centimetres too short that way, or 8 centimetres too short that way. But what I am sort of expecting is that old mate the concrete ore will agree with my suggestion that he needs to come up here with a masonry bit and bore holes into here, probably 6 inches or a foot, and they're going to have to stick out at least 8 centimetres, and they're going to have elbow bends on the ends of them, and they're all going to have to turn either sideways or hanging down all the way along here. And you can chisel that bit of concrete out of there and do the same all the way along here, and then you can box that up in with some formwork, and you can add 10 centimetres out here, and you can add 10 centimetres out here, and he can do all that as soon as possible, because we can't really proceed with this shed until he makes the slab big enough. And I'm figuring that the bits of Rio that go in through the holes drilled with the masonry bit, they should be glued in there with epoxy resin. Some really high-grade industrial resin will do. And if there's none of that, then the stickiest, strongest silicon they've got, the stuff that the Parks and Wildlife uses to glue their water tanks onto the concrete slabs, so that people who tie the water tanks to the back of their vehicles and try to steal the tanks pull the diff out of the back of their car, because the silicon sticks the tank to the concrete, and that's much heavier than their diff was designed to cope with as a snatch load. So there are ways that you can stick reinforcing rods into a pre-existing slab that's too bloody small, and you can cast the new, you know, like a lace edge around a doily that your mother used to crochet. And why do I think that the error was made there? Because we had all of this bloody spare concrete, didn't we? Yeah, we had a lot of the spare concrete. I was able to make steps and cover up a wall, yeah. Put down a little archway. Yeah, all that should have been in the slab to make the slab the correct size. So roundabouts and swings, hey. Perhaps the most ironic thing is my mother was going to leave this piece of timber, which I have used as packing and padding on these panels. She was going to leave it hanging on the fence when she sold the house at Lawrence Street, probably 15 years ago or so. But that used to be a longer bit of wood. because we were trying to beat the rain and we were in a hurry to have a bit of wood, I just grabbed the far end of it from out down there and reefed it sideways until it broke off. But the other end of that is in there, and I actually did cut it. After we got that bit on there, we needed a longer bit of wood, so yeah, I cut the end of it. A third of it's there. The other 2/3 has been cut into 2 bits to go on into duty up there. So we would be talking 1976, maybe 1978. Eric John Wharton brought that bit of wood back from the timber dump because it had one corner missing. It was a bit of sapwood on one corner, but it was otherwise about 30 feet long. It was the longest bit of single sawn timber the old man had seen lying around. So he snaffled it and brought it home, and he hung it on his fence because it was so big and so long he couldn't bear to cut it. And when Mum was selling the place, I couldn't bear to see it left there. So I brought it here, and yeah, okay, a bit of it was dangling on the ground and the white ants got to it. Finally, Eric John Wharton's longest bit of wood has been cut into 3 pieces, and 2 of them are propping up Elizabeth Jennifer Wharton's garden shed on its pad that's too bloody small. Bummer. At least that bit of wood finally got to go to some good use, along with probably half, maybe 3/4 of the pile of stuff that I yet have to move out of the way so that I can construct a framework on which to fit a pair of 440 watt 24 volt solar panels. And because I've got 4 solar arrays currently in my yard, counting my daughters behind me, I think with the 5th one we'll go for yet another different version. This one's going to have 45-degree panels that are daily trackable through 180 degrees. You know, they'll go from there to there. But they'll be at ground level, so you can wipe them down. You haven't got to worry about watching pigeon shit take a week to go away in the dew. Daily trackable, not necessarily because I want the extra power, but because that means I can do my best to turn them sideways onto a hailstorm when a hailstorm is approaching, which I can't do with the panel on the roof of the hut, and my daughter can't do with the panels in front of the tent. I can do it with a little 10 watt panel over there on the experimental pole with the hinge on it. But it's a killer app for having trackable panels, is being able to turn your expensive solar panels that are going to be a pain in the arse while you wait for new ones the right side to show up, and then you've got to take the old ones off the tower and put the new ones back. Yeah, if you can turn them sideways, that will be good. So I think that more or less provides something of an update as to how the progress is progressing. And as I showed in the previous video, the new stone arrow is probably going to go about there, so that when people come along here and they get a choice between going up the gentle slope so that they don't have to apply as much power to each individual square metre of dirt and driveway coming under their tyres as they would if they were to go up the steeper slope, which I like to tend to hold in reserve so that I can roll start downhill in case I come up with a flat battery, which once upon a time used to be a possibility, but now that I've got a solar panel on the roof of my car, doesn't actually happen anymore. But you know, force of habit, and it minimises the wear and tear load-wise on the driveway. So, warbles on a lot to YouTube. Thus be the update. Early stage concrete contractors, in their hurry and their haste and their rush, yeah, they can make mistakes. I think the trick is not to get all hot under the collar and be nasty about it, as long as he fixes it and doesn't charge us to fix it. It's going to be a learning experience. We shall see what we shall see. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao. And one more thing, post-scriptum, so to speak. For those of you who were wondering, Yes, the two sheds are identical. 3 by 2.96. So, yeah. And we couldn't move this shed down to there and put it up on my pad because I'm waiting for 3 sets of windows. I would like to have 2 windows in my north wall and 1 window in my east wall. And the one fortuitous good thing that comes of this is that I also ordered a skylight, and the skylight goes on when the roof comes on. And I was always thinking to donate the skylight to Elizabeth's shed, and that would involve later on taking off 1 roofing panel. I think by the time this bloody mess is sorted out, the skylight might be here and it can go in at the first instance. So yeah, there's always some good in it no matter what happens, according to my grandmother on my mother's side. Such is life. Have a good one. Ciao.